Limestone County, Texas, March 15, 2007, a date that would forever change the quiet suburban neighborhood of Pine Creek Estates. It began as an ordinary Thursday afternoon in this small community where most residents knew each other by name. The weather was mild for early spring in central Texas, with clear skies and a gentle breeze rustling through the oak trees that lined the residential streets. 13-year-old Ethan Mercer was a seventh grader at Limestone Middle School, described by teachers as bright and thoughtful. Standing at 5'3" with sandy brown hair and hazel eyes, Ethan was known for his passion for astronomy and his collection of science fiction novels. That Thursday, he wore a blue and white striped polo shirt, jeans, and his favorite red backpack adorned with NASA patches. At 3:15 p.m., school surveillance footage captured Ethan exiting the building with his classmates. Several students later confirmed seeing him begin his usual 1-mile walk home, a route he'd taken hundreds of times before. The path took him down Oakwood Drive, past the community park, and through a small wooded shortcut that local children frequently used. Ethan was expected home by 3:45 p.m. When 4:00 p.m. came and Ethan hadn't arrived, his mother, Allison Mercer, a part-time nurse at Limestone Memorial Hospital, felt the first flickers of concern. She called several of Ethan's friends, none of whom had seen him after school. By 4:30 p.m., Allison contacted her husband, Gregory Mercer, an accountant who was working late at his office in neighboring Waco. At 5:17 p.m., the first call to emergency services was placed. Dispatcher logs recorded Allison's increasingly panicked voice. "My son was supposed to be home from school almost 2 hours ago. This isn't like him. Something's wrong." Limestone County Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Hernandez arrived at the Mercer home within 20 minutes. Following standard protocol for missing children cases, he collected a recent photograph of Ethan and a detailed description of his clothing and appearance. Deputy Hernandez immediately initiated a neighborhood canvass, while additional officers began tracing Ethan's route from school. By nightfall, Sheriff Randall Owens had authorized an expanded search. 20 officers, along with volunteer firefighters and concerned neighbors, formed search parties that combed the area with flashlights. The temperature had dropped into the low 50s, adding urgency to the search. Local news stations interrupted regular programming with the first public alerts about Ethan's disappearance. At 9:43 p.m., the first significant discovery was made. Officer Tanya Wilson located Ethan's red backpack in a vacant lot 3 blocks from his home. The backpack was partially hidden behind a cluster of brambles, its contents, textbooks, homework assignments, and a half-eaten sandwich, still inside. There were no obvious signs of struggle at the scene, but the location was odd. It wasn't on Ethan's normal route home. Forensic technician Kyle Bennett processed the scene, collecting soil samples and examining the backpack for fingerprints. The positioning of the bag suggested it hadn't been thrown or dropped in haste, Bennett would later testify. It appeared to have been deliberately placed there. As the first night stretched into early morning, the search intensified. Helicopter units from the Texas Department of Public Safety joined the effort, using thermal imaging equipment to scan the surrounding woodland areas. K-9 units tracked Ethan's scent from the backpack site, but lost the trail at Sycamore Street, suggesting he might have entered a vehicle at that location. Sheriff Owens established a command center at the Limestone County Community Center. By dawn, over 100 volunteers had joined the search, and the FBI had been notified under the National Child Abduction Response Protocols. The Mercer home became a hub of frantic activity. Gregory and Allison, hollow-eyed from a sleepless night, provided investigators with lists of Ethan's friends, acquaintances, and recent activities. They revealed no family conflicts, no concerning behavior changes, and no reason why their son would voluntarily disappear. "Ethan wouldn't run away," Allison insisted to investigators, her voice breaking. "He's responsible. He always calls if he's going to be late. Something has happened to him." The community response was immediate and overwhelming. By the afternoon of March 16th, posters with Ethan's face appeared throughout Limestone County and neighboring communities. Local businesses contributed to a reward fund that reached $25,000 within days. Churches organized prayer vigils, and the school arranged counseling services for Ethan's distressed classmates. The investigation faced significant challenges from the outset. Pine Creek Estates had no municipal surveillance cameras, and none of the residential security systems in the area had captured useful footage. The timing of the disappearance, mid-afternoon on a weekday, was puzzling to investigators. as it represented a bold move by a potential abductor during a time when witnesses were likely. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, Sheriff Owens told reporters during a press conference 48 hours into the search. The evidence suggests premeditation. Someone knew Ethan's routine and exploited it. A breakthrough came on the third day when investigators canvassing door-to-door spoke with Eleanor Diaz, a retired schoolteacher who lived on Sycamore Street. Diaz recalled seeing Ethan talking with a neighbor, Troy Whitman, on several occasions in the weeks before the disappearance. These interactions hadn't seemed concerning at the time, brief conversations as Ethan passed Whitman's house on his way home from school. Mr. Whitman moved to the neighborhood around September last year, Diaz told Detective Leanne Marshall. Keeps to himself mostly. I noticed him chatting with Ethan a few times. Thought maybe they were talking about the model airplanes Whitman works on in his garage. Troy Whitman, 42, lived alone at 237 Sycamore Street, 3 blocks from the Mercer family home. Property records showed he had purchased the modest 2-story house 6 months earlier, paying in cash after selling his previous residence in Oklahoma. His background check revealed no criminal history, though gaps existed in his employment record. Currently, he worked remotely as a technical writer for a software company. When detectives first approached Whitman on March 18th, he appeared cooperative. He claimed to have been working from home on the day of Ethan's disappearance and said he hadn't seen the boy that afternoon. I was on deadline, Whitman explained. Didn't leave the house at all that day. Initial investigation of Whitman's alibi seemed to check out. His employer confirmed he had submitted work during the time frame in question, and his internet service provider verified active connection throughout the afternoon of March 15th. As days stretched into a week with no sign of Ethan, the investigation broadened. FBI agent Barrett Flynn arrived from the Dallas field office, bringing specialized resources and expertise in child abduction cases. Following standard procedure, investigators scrutinized the Mercer family first. Gregory and Allison Mercer's backgrounds, financial records, and relationships were thoroughly examined. Both passed polygraph tests when asked about their knowledge of Ethan's whereabouts. Investigators found no evidence of family dysfunction that might explain a voluntary disappearance. Ethan's personal computer revealed typical teenage interests: astronomy websites, video game forums, and school research, but no concerning communications. The hardest part was watching the hope slowly drain from the parents' eyes, Agent Flynn would later write in his case notes. Every day without answers felt like losing their son all over again. By the end of the first week, the case had garnered national attention. Ethan's face appeared on major news networks and missing children alerts across the country. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit developed a profile of a potential abductor, likely a male with local knowledge, possibly someone who had observed Ethan over time and gained a level of trust. The profile disturbed investigators because it potentially matched dozens of individuals in the community. Without concrete evidence or witnesses, the list of persons of interest remained frustratingly broad. As March turned into April, search efforts continued, but with diminishing resources. The initial urgency gave way to a methodical, grinding investigation. Detectives re-interviewed witnesses, rechecked alibis, and expanded their search to include registered sex offenders within a 50-mile radius. Despite these efforts, the trail grew colder. The Mercers, desperate for answers, hired a private investigator and increased the reward to $50,000. They appeared on national television, pleading for information about their son. "Someone knows something," Gregory Mercer said during an emotional interview. "Please, if you know anything about what happened to Ethan, come forward. We just want our son back." But as spring blossomed across Limestone County, the answers they sought remained elusive. The once bustling command center grew quieter. The daily press briefings became weekly, then monthly. For the community of Pine Creek Estates, the empty desk in Ethan's classroom served as a haunting reminder of the boy who vanished without a trace on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. What investigators didn't know then was that the truth lay hidden much closer than anyone suspected. And the first crucial clue had already been overlooked, buried in a detail about Troy Whitman that would only emerge months later when a dedicated detective decided to look deeper into the quiet neighbor whose path had crossed with Ethan's just before he disappeared. As April 2007 progressed, the investigation into Ethan Mercer's disappearance entered a new phase. The initial surge of tips and leads had dwindled, leaving investigators to methodically sift through the evidence they had gathered. FBI agent Barrett Flynn, a 20-year veteran specializing in child abduction cases, took formal command of the investigation, bringing a fresh perspective to the case that had shaken Limestone County to its core. Flynn, with his signature meticulous approach, established a dedicated task force headquartered in a repurposed conference room at the Limestone County Sheriff's Department. The walls were soon covered with timelines, photographs, and maps detailing every known moment of Ethan's last day. At the center hung a large school portrait of the missing 13-year-old, serving as a constant reminder of what was at stake. In cases like these, we follow the evidence, not our emotions, Flynn told his team during their first briefing. But we never forget who we're working for. He pointed to Ethan's photograph, the boy's shy smile and bright eyes a stark contrast to the clinical investigative materials surrounding it. Following standard protocol for cases involving missing children, Flynn's first action was to thoroughly investigate the Mercer family. This approach, while often painful for the parents, was based on statistical reality. In many cases of child disappearances, family members were involved. Allison and Gregory Mercer were subjected to extensive background checks and multiple interviews, often lasting hours. Their financial records, phone histories, and personal relationships were scrutinized. The couple's initial resentment gave way to resigned cooperation as they understood the necessity of eliminating them as suspects. "I know how this looks," Flynn explained to the Mercers during a particularly difficult session, "but I need to rule you out definitively so we can focus our resources elsewhere." The investigation revealed a stable middle-class family with no significant financial problems or suspicious activities. Colleagues described Gregory as dedicated and straightforward. Allison's co-workers at the hospital vouched for her character and devotion to her son. Ethan's teachers painted a picture of a well-adjusted, intelligent child with no signs of family trauma or distress. By late April, after multiple polygraph tests and thorough investigation, the Mercers were formally cleared as suspects. This development, while a relief to the family, highlighted the troubling reality. If Ethan hadn't run away and his family wasn't involved, then someone had taken him. With this conclusion, Flynn expanded the investigation outward, developing a systematic approach to mapping the community. Every resident within a 1-mile radius of Ethan's route home was interviewed. Sex offenders throughout the county were investigated and their whereabouts on March 15th verified. School staff, Ethan's friends, and local business owners along his path were questioned repeatedly, searching for details that might have been missed in the initial chaos. During this process, Eleanor Diaz's earlier statement about Troy Whitman's interactions with Ethan took on new significance. Detective Leanne Marshall, assigned to follow up on neighborhood interviews, returned to speak with the retired teacher. "I've been thinking about it more," Diaz told Marshall during their second interview. "Whitman would often be in his front yard when the school kids passed by. I didn't think much of it then, but he did seem to pay special attention to Ethan. Once I saw him give something to the boy, looked like a book or magazine. This information prompted a closer look at Troy Whitman. On the surface, he presented as an unremarkable neighbor, a single man who worked from home and largely kept to himself. His modest house on Sycamore Street was well maintained, if somewhat Spartan. Neighbors described him as polite but private, someone who would wave hello but rarely engaged in conversation. When agents conducted a deeper background check on Whitman, they found a life marked by frequent relocations. Over the past 15 years, he had lived in 6 different states, never staying in one location for more than 3 years. His employment history showed a pattern of remote work positions, primarily as a technical writer for various technology companies. "He's like a ghost," remarked Detective Marshall, reviewing Whitman's file. "Present enough not to raise suspicion, but without leaving any significant impression." On May the 2nd, Flynn and Marshall conducted a formal interview with Whitman at the Sheriff's Department. Whitman arrived promptly, dressed in neatly pressed khakis and a button-down shirt. He appeared calm and cooperative, expressing appropriate concern about the missing boy. "Of course I want to help," he told the investigators. "It's terrible what happened. I've seen the posters everywhere." Throughout the 3-hour interview, Whitman maintained a consistent account of his activities on March 15th. He claimed to have been working on a technical manual for his employer, meeting a deadline that required his full attention. He acknowledged occasionally speaking with Ethan, describing their interactions as casual conversations about school and science. "He seemed like a bright kid," Whitman said, "reminded me of myself at that age, interested in how things work. I gave him a magazine about aviation once when he mentioned he was doing a science project." When asked about his movements on the day of the disappearance, Whitman stated he hadn't left his house until evening, when he drove to a grocery store in Waco. Security footage from the store confirmed his presence there at 7:42 p.m., well after Ethan had vanished. Flynn noted that Whitman maintained steady eye contact throughout the interview and displayed no nervous tics or defensive body language typically associated with deception. His answers, while detailed, never volunteered information beyond what was asked, a behavior that Flynn found interesting but not conclusive of guilt. "Mr. Whitman, would you be willing to consent to a search of your property?" Flynn asked near the end of the interview. "I don't see why that would be necessary," Whitman replied, his expression unchanged. "But if you have a warrant, I'll certainly comply." This response, legally appropriate but uncooperative, raised Flynn's suspicions. However, without evidence linking Whitman to Ethan's disappearance, there were insufficient grounds for a search warrant. Whitman was released with thanks for his cooperation. Following the interview, surveillance was discreetly established on Whitman's residence. For 2 weeks, agents observed his movements, noting a remarkably consistent routine. He rarely left home except for grocery shopping and occasional visits to a local hardware store. He received no visitors. His trash, collected and examined weekly, revealed nothing unusual, primarily food packaging, technical manuals, and computer printouts related to his work. Meanwhile, the search for Ethan continued. Specialized K-9 teams trained in detecting human remains were brought in to search wooded areas and waterways throughout the county. Rural properties and abandoned buildings were examined. A team of divers checked local ponds and the reservoir. These efforts yielded no trace of the missing boy. By June, the investigation faced mounting challenges. Media attention had waned, moving on to newer tragedies. The reward for information had generated hundreds of tips, each meticulously followed up, but none had led to meaningful progress. The task force, once bustling with federal and state resources, began to contract as agents were reassigned to other cases. Flynn, however, remained convinced that the answer lay somewhere in Limestone County. "Abduction cases like this are rarely random," he explained to Sheriff Owens during a strategy meeting. "The perpetrator almost always has some connection to the victim or the area. We're missing something." That something began to emerge in late June, when agents expanded their investigation into Whitman's past. In Oklahoma City, where Whitman had lived from 2004 to 2006, they discovered he had been questioned in connection with another case involving a minor, a 12-year-old boy who had reported that a man matching Whitman's description had repeatedly offered him rides home from school. The boy had refused and eventually reported the encounters to his parents. Police had questioned Whitman, but no charges were filed due to insufficient evidence and the absence of any actual crime. This revelation, while not directly incriminating, established a concerning pattern of behavior. Flynn immediately applied for additional resources to investigate Whitman's residences in other states, searching for similar reports or patterns. In early July, as temperatures in Texas soared above 100 degrees, the investigation received its first significant breakthrough. Records from Whitman's former employer revealed a discrepancy in his alibi. Though he had indeed submitted work on March 15th, the timestamps on his submissions showed gaps of several hours, directly contradicting his claim of uninterrupted work throughout the afternoon when Ethan disappeared. Furthermore, cell tower records finally obtained after weeks of legal requests showed that Whitman's phone had connected to a tower near the vacant lot where Ethan's backpack was found, approximately during the time frame of the boy's disappearance. "It's circumstantial," Flynn acknowledged during a team briefing, "but it's the first concrete evidence suggesting Whitman lied about his whereabouts." Armed with this information, Flynn approached Judge Clayton Brenner for a search warrant for Whitman's property. Judge Brenner, known for his stringent requirements regarding probable cause, initially hesitated. "What you have is suspicious, Agent Flynn, but it doesn't quite reach the threshold for a comprehensive search," Brenner said, reviewing the application. "I'll authorize a limited warrant for electronic devices and any evidence potentially related to Ethan Mercer, but not the full property search you're requesting." On July 12, 2007, a team of FBI agents and local detectives executed the limited search warrant at 237 Sycamore Street. Whitman, appearing surprised but not panicked, observed silently as agents collected his computer, phone, and various storage devices. The forensic analysis of these devices revealed troubling content. While there was no direct evidence related to Ethan, technicians discovered sophisticated encryption software and evidence that large quantities of data had been deleted shortly after Ethan's disappearance. More concerning was a collection of photographs taken at local parks and school zones, surveillance-style images of various children, though none specifically of Ethan. "This isn't enough for an arrest," the district attorney advised when presented with the findings. "It's suspicious behavior, but we need more to connect him directly to the Mercer boy." As July turned to August, the investigation seemed to hit another wall. Whitman, now clearly aware he was under scrutiny, became even more reclusive. He retained an attorney who issued a statement declaring his client's innocence and demanding an end to what was described as harassment based on circumstantial evidence and community hysteria. The pressure on the task force intensified. Resources continued to dwindle, and the Mercer family, desperate for closure, began to publicly question the effectiveness of the investigation. Local media ran stories analyzing the failed search for Ethan, highlighting the lack of arrests despite 4 months of intensive investigation. In response to mounting criticism, Sheriff Owens called a press conference on August 15th, exactly 5 months after Ethan's disappearance. Standing before a room of reporters, with the Mercer family seated solemnly in the front row, Owens announced a difficult decision. "While the investigation into Ethan Mercer's disappearance remains open, we are transitioning from an active search operation to a long-term missing persons case," he stated, his weathered face reflecting the toll of the unsuccessful search. "This does not mean we're giving up. It means we're acknowledging the need for a sustainable approach to finding answers." What the sheriff didn't reveal publicly was that the investigation was about to take a significant turn. Behind the scenes, as the official search scaled back, a crucial piece of evidence was emerging, one that would ultimately lead investigators back to the quiet house on Sycamore Street, where Troy Whitman continued his seemingly ordinary life while carefully guarding a horrifying secret beneath his very feet. By September 2007, as summer heat gave way to autumn breezes in Limestone County, the case file for Ethan Mercer's disappearance was officially classified as long-term missing, investigation pending. But one detective, newly assigned to the county's cold case unit, was about to discover the critical oversight that had allowed Ethan's captor to remain hidden in plain sight for months. By September 2007, the investigation into Ethan Mercer's disappearance had entered what law enforcement grimly refers to as the cold case phase. The bustling command center, once filled with federal agents and local officers, had been dismantled. The daily briefings had ceased. The media trucks that had once lined the streets of Limestone County were long gone, their attention captured by newer tragedies. For the Mercer family, this transition represented a devastating new reality. Their son had been missing for 6 months, and the official search had been scaled back to what amounted to paperwork reviews and occasional follow-ups on declining numbers of tips. Allison Mercer had taken indefinite leave from her nursing position, unable to focus on work while her son remained missing. Gregory had returned to his accounting job, but described himself as going through the motions. "It feels like the world has moved on," Allison told a local reporter during a small gathering to mark the 6-month anniversary of Ethan's disappearance. "But we're frozen in time, waiting for answers that never come." It was in this atmosphere of dwindling hope that Detective Renata Vaughn entered the case. Recently transferred to Limestone County after a distinguished career with the Houston Police Department's Cold Case Unit, Vaughn had requested to review the Mercer file as part of her assessment of the department's unsolved cases. Vaughn, 42, was known for her methodical approach and unflinching persistence. With sharp eyes framed by rectangular glasses and prematurely silver hair, often pulled back in a practical ponytail, she had built a reputation for finding overlooked details in abandoned investigations. "Fresh eyes sometimes see what tired ones miss," she explained to Sheriff Owens when requesting access to the complete Mercer file. "I'd like to start from the beginning without preconceptions." Owens, still bearing the professional and personal weight of the failed search, readily agreed. "Take whatever you need, Detective. That family deserves answers." Vaughn established herself in a small windowless office at the Sheriff's Department, surrounded by boxes of evidence, interview transcripts, and investigative reports. For 2 weeks, she immersed herself in the case, reading every document, viewing every photograph and listening to every recorded interview. She focused particular attention on the early days of the investigation, when the volume of information had been overwhelming and crucial details might have been overlooked in the urgency of the search. It was during this methodical review that Vaughn first noted several inconsistencies surrounding Troy Whitman. "The timeline doesn't add up," she muttered to herself one evening, comparing Whitman's interview statements with his phone records and employment documentation. He claimed to be working continuously, but there are gaps, significant gaps. Digging deeper, Vaughn discovered that while FBI agent Flynn had noted these discrepancies, the full implications had never been explored. The limited search warrant for Whitman's electronic devices hadn't extended to his employment records. This oversight proved crucial. On September 28th, Vaughn contacted Whitman's employer TechRight Solutions directly. Speaking with Human Resources Director Martina Gonzalez, she made a discovery that sent a chill down her spine. "Mr. Whitman actually requested the day off on March 15th, Gonzalez confirmed, reviewing the company's attendance records. "He submitted his work the previous evening, then took a personal day. Our records show he returned to regular work hours on March 16th. This directly contradicted Whitman's statement that he had been working at home throughout the day of Ethan's disappearance. When combined with the cell tower data placing his phone near the location where Ethan's backpack was found, it transformed Whitman from a person of interest into a prime suspect. Vaughn immediately reported her findings to Sheriff Owens and contacted Agent Flynn, who had since been reassigned to the FBI's San Antonio office. "Whitman lied about his whereabouts," Vaughn explained during a conference call with both men. "He wasn't working that day. He specifically took it off, and this wasn't discovered during the initial investigation. Flynn's frustration was palpable even through the phone line. We questioned his timeline, but without the employment verification, we couldn't prove the inconsistency. The company wasn't forthcoming with their records when we made informal inquiries." Armed with this new information, Vaughn expanded her investigation of Whitman. She obtained his complete financial records through a court order, revealing another troubling pattern that had been partially examined but not fully analyzed in the original investigation. In the weeks leading up to Ethan's disappearance, Whitman had made several large purchases at hardware and home improvement stores. The original investigators had noted these transactions, but hadn't obtained itemized receipts showing exactly what was purchased. Vaughn's methodical approach yielded these details. Over a 3-week period in February and early March 2007, Whitman had purchased substantial quantities of soundproofing materials, specialized locks, electrical supplies, and construction tools. One particularly concerning purchase included a hospital-grade portable toilet system. "He was preparing something," Vaughn told Sheriff Owens, spreading the receipts across his desk. "Look at this. Soundproofing insulation, interior door locks with keypad entry, a ventilation system. These aren't typical home improvement items." Even more troubling were Whitman's grocery receipts from the same period, showing bulk purchases of non-perishable foods, bottled water, and basic medical supplies. The quantities far exceeded what a single individual would reasonably consume. He was stocking up, Vaughn concluded, creating a supply cache for something or someone. While these discoveries painted an increasingly suspicious picture, they still didn't provide direct evidence linking Whitman to Ethan's disappearance. Vaughn needed more if she hoped to obtain a comprehensive search warrant for Whitman's property. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Reviewing Eleanor Diaz's interview transcripts, Vaughn noticed a comment that had been flagged as interesting but not fully investigated. Diaz had mentioned seeing Whitman taking photographs at the park near the middle school. Vaughn located Diaz, now living with her daughter in neighboring Waco, following a mild stroke in July. Despite her health challenges, the retired teacher's memory remained sharp. "Yes, I saw him several times at the park," Diaz confirmed during their interview, always with a camera with a long lens. "I assumed he was photographing birds. There's a wildlife sanctuary nearby. But thinking back, he was often there when school was letting out." This information connected directly to the surveillance-style photographs of children discovered during the limited search of Whitman's electronic devices. But Vaughn needed more concrete evidence to convince a judge to authorize a full property search. She decided to approach Whitman's former residences from a new angle. While previous investigators had checked for similar reported incidents involving children, Vaughn focused on property records and building permits. In Oklahoma City, where Whitman had lived from 2004 to 2006, Vaughn discovered he had undertaken extensive renovations to the basement of his home. The permits indicated structural modifications, including the addition of a separate electrical circuit and plumbing work that didn't connect to the main house system. The renovations were extensive and unusual, explained Oklahoma City Building Inspector Terrence Washington when Vaughn contacted him. Technically within code, but odd for a single-occupant dwelling. He installed a second breaker box dedicated to the basement and a water system that bypassed the main plumbing. Similar patterns emerged in records from Whitman's previous residences in Colorado and Missouri. In each location, he had purchased homes with basements or substantial crawl spaces and had undertaken significant modifications to these areas. By mid-October, Vaughn had compiled enough new evidence to approach District Attorney Victor Ramirez about pursuing a more comprehensive investigation of Whitman. What we have is a pattern of behavior consistent with someone creating concealed spaces, she explained, presenting her findings. Combined with his documented interest in children, his presence near Ethan Mercer on multiple occasions, and his proven lie about his whereabouts on the day of the disappearance, I believe we have sufficient cause to investigate further. Ramirez, initially skeptical after the previous unsuccessful attempts to link Whitman to the case, was swayed by Vaughn's methodical presentation of new evidence. "You've found enough to justify surveillance, certainly," he agreed, but Judge Brenner already denied a full property search once. He'll want something more concrete before approving another warrant. Vaughn proposed a two-pronged approach: enhanced surveillance of Whitman combined with a deeper investigation into his purchasing patterns since Ethan's disappearance. If Whitman was indeed holding someone captive, he would need to maintain supplies and food. For the next 3 weeks, a small team monitored Whitman's movements. His routine remained remarkably consistent and isolated. He left home primarily for groceries, occasionally visited hardware stores, and once attended a medical appointment. He had no visitors and made no social calls. Analysis of his recent purchases revealed consistent buying of quantities of food and supplies that exceeded normal consumption for a single person, particularly in categories like milk, bread, and canned goods that would need regular replenishing. But the most significant discovery came when Vaughn obtained Whitman's utility records. His water and electricity usage showed a consistent pattern that didn't fluctuate with weather conditions as typical residential usage would. Instead, it maintained a steady, elevated level regardless of season, suggesting constant use beyond normal household requirements. Compare his water usage to similar single-occupant homes, Vaughn highlighted during a briefing with Sheriff Owens. He's consistently using 40–50% more, with almost no variation month to month. That's not normal residential usage. By November 2007, Vaughn had compiled what she believed was sufficient evidence to approach Judge Brenner again. However, before she could file for a new search warrant, the case took an unexpected turn. The local television station, seeking to boost ratings during Sweeps Month, aired a retrospective on Ethan's disappearance titled 7 Months of Silence, The Ethan Mercer Mystery. The program included interviews with the Mercer family, law enforcement officials, and community members who had participated in the search. Vaughn had declined to participate, concerned about revealing the progress of her renewed investigation. But the program had an unintended consequence that would prove invaluable. 3 days after the broadcast, Vaughn received a call from a woman named Amber Calloway, who identified herself as Troy Whitman's former girlfriend from his time in Oklahoma City. "I saw the program about that missing boy," Calloway said, her voice tense. "When they showed the neighbor they'd investigated, I recognized Troy immediately. There are things about him you should know." Vaughn arranged to meet Calloway in person, traveling to Oklahoma City the following day. In a quiet corner of a hotel restaurant, Calloway revealed information that transformed the investigation. "We dated for about 8 months in 2005, Calloway explained, nervously turning her coffee cup. "At first he seemed normal, quiet, intelligent, a bit socially awkward, but there were warning signs I ignored." According to Calloway, Whitman had been obsessively secretive about the basement renovations in his Oklahoma home, refusing to allow her access to that part of the house. He had installed multiple locks on the basement door and became agitated if she asked questions about the space. He claimed it was his work sanctuary, Calloway recalled, but sometimes late at night, I'd hear strange sounds from down there, mechanical noises like ventilation or plumbing. Most disturbing was Whitman's increasing interest in her 11-year-old son from a previous relationship. Calloway described how Whitman would ask detailed questions about the boy's schedule, interests, and activities. He offered to pick him up from school on multiple occasions, despite Calloway never requesting this assistance. The breaking point came when I found a file on his computer, she continued, lowering her voice. It contained detailed information about several boys in the neighborhood, their schedules, routes to school, family situations. My son was in that file. Calloway had ended the relationship immediately and moved to her sister's home. She had reported her concerns to local police, but without evidence of an actual crime, little action was taken. Whitman had moved away from Oklahoma City shortly afterward. When I saw his face on that program, connected to a missing boy, I couldn't stay silent again, Calloway concluded. I've carried this guilt for years, wondering if I should have done more. Vaughn recorded Calloway's statement and obtained her agreement to testify if necessary. This testimony, combined with the physical evidence and pattern analysis Vaughn had compiled, finally provided the compelling case needed for a comprehensive search warrant. On December 15, 2007, Judge Clayton Brenner reviewed the complete evidence package. After 3 hours of deliberation, he authorized a full search warrant for Troy Whitman's property at 237 Sycamore Street, including permission to use ground-penetrating radar and structural inspection tools. Detective Vaughn, the judge noted as he signed the warrant, this is exemplary investigative work. I hope it brings answers to the Mercer family. As the search was planned for early January 2008, neither Vaughn nor anyone else on the investigative team could have imagined what they would discover beneath the ordinary-looking house on Sycamore Street, or that their search would come just in time to prevent an even greater tragedy. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, revealing a calculated predator who had been hiding in plain sight within the community. But the most shocking revelation was still to come, one that would forever change the definition of hope for a family that had been living in limbo for nearly 10 months. January 2008 arrived in Limestone County with an unusual cold snap. Frost covered the dormant lawns of Pine Creek Estates as residents retreated indoors, their holiday decorations packed away, their lives returning to post-celebration routines. For most, the disappearance of Ethan Mercer had faded into background awareness, a tragic local story occasionally referenced but no longer at the forefront of daily conversation. For Detective Renata Vaughn, however, January marked the culmination of months of meticulous investigation. The search warrant for Troy Whitman's property had been secured, but Vaughn insisted on thorough preparation before execution. She assembled a specialized team that included structural engineers, forensic technicians, and tactical officers with experience in hostage situations. "We don't know what we'll find," she emphasized during the final planning meeting, "but we need to be prepared for every possibility." The possibility that Ethan might still be alive remained unspoken, but hung in the air during these preparations. After 10 months, conventional wisdom in missing children cases suggested a grim outcome. Yet something in Whitman's behavior, the continued purchases of fresh food, the consistent utility usage, fueled a tiny flicker of hope that Vaughn kept carefully guarded. The operation was scheduled for January 17th, deliberately chosen for a time when Whitman typically visited a grocery store in Waco, 30 minutes away. Surveillance confirmed his departure at 10:14 a.m., giving the team a predictable window to enter the property before his return. At 10:30 a.m., under overcast skies that matched the somber mood of the operation, Vaughn led a convoy of unmarked vehicles to 237 Sycamore Street. Neighbors watched curiously as officers established a perimeter, while Vaughn and the core search team approached the front door. The house stood silent, an unassuming two-story structure with beige siding and dark green shutters. A concrete path led to a small porch where a single wicker chair faced the street. Nothing about its exterior suggested the secrets it might contain. Using the keys provided by the warrant, Vaughn unlocked the door. The team entered efficiently, following established protocols to secure the premises room by room. The interior presented a study in orderliness. Furniture precisely arranged, surfaces dust-free, everything in its proper place. The kitchen contained minimal perishable foods, but was stocked with canned goods and pasta. The living room held a modest television and a bookshelf filled with technical manuals and science fiction novels. Upstairs, the master bedroom contained a neatly made bed and a small desk with a computer. "It's like a display home," observed forensic technician Melissa Chen. "Impersonal, no photographs, no mementos." The team's primary focus, however, was the basement. The door leading downstairs featured an electronic keypad lock, a sophisticated security measure unusual for an interior door. Using equipment designed for such systems, technicians bypassed the lock within minutes. The basement stairs descended into darkness. As lights illuminated the space, the team's initial observations seemed anticlimactic. The basement appeared to be a standard unfinished space with concrete floors and exposed ceiling joists. A washer and dryer stood in one corner. Tools hung organized on a pegboard wall. A workbench held various electronics projects in various stages of completion. "Begin the structural assessment," Vaughan directed. "Full spectrum sweep." The specialized team deployed ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging equipment, and acoustic detection devices designed to identify hidden spaces. For nearly 2 hours, they methodically examined every inch of the basement, taking measurements and comparing them with the house's exterior dimensions. It was Chief Engineer Ramon Diaz who first identified the discrepancy. "The north wall," he indicated, pointing to his measurements. "The interior dimensions don't match the exterior foundation. There's approximately a 12-foot discrepancy." Thermal imaging confirmed the anomaly. Behind the apparently solid concrete wall, there was a space with a heat signature distinctly different from the surrounding foundation. "There's something behind this section," confirmed Technician Chen, running her hand along the unremarkable-looking wall. "The question is how to access it." The team's careful examination eventually revealed the access mechanism, a sophisticated pressure plate beneath a specific floor tile that, when activated while the correct code was entered on a hidden keypad disguised as an electrical outlet, released the locking mechanism. At 1:17 p.m., the false wall silently slid open, revealing a secondary space that sent shockwaves through even the most experienced members of the team. Behind the wall lay a carefully constructed room, approximately 10 feet by 12 feet. Unlike the unfinished basement, this space featured insulated walls, finished flooring, and recessed lighting. A twin bed with hospital-grade restraints stood against one wall. A stainless steel toilet and sink occupied a corner. A small desk held books, paper, and pencils. A shelf contained non-perishable food items and bottled water. Most disturbing was the sophisticated surveillance system that allowed viewing of the main house and exterior from a small monitor mounted on the wall. "It's a holding cell," Vaughan stated, her normally measured voice tight with tension. "Designed for long-term confinement, but the room was empty." As the team processed this disturbing discovery, Officer Marcus Hernandez called from upstairs. "Detective, we found something in his home office you should see." In a locked drawer of Whitman's desk, officers discovered a laptop that hadn't been identified during the previous limited search. Protected by multiple layers of encryption, it would later require specialized FBI technicians to access its contents. But more immediately relevant was a physical calendar found beside it, with entries in a coded shorthand that initially seemed meaningless. Forensic analyst Jordan Williams quickly recognized the pattern. "These are locations," he determined, studying the notations, "coordinates possibly, or some kind of personal mapping system, and they're organized chronologically." The most recent entry, marked for January 20th, just 3 days away, contained a notation that sent immediate alarm through the investigative team. "Relocation complete. He's planning something," Vaughan concluded, the implications immediately clear, possibly moving his operation or a victim. With Whitman still away from the house and expected to return any moment, decisions had to be made quickly. Vaughan ordered the team to withdraw from the property, leaving it appearing undisturbed while maintaining surveillance. She then contacted FBI agent Barrett Flynn, who had remained involved in the case, despite his reassignment. "We need to move on Whitman now," she told him, relaying their discoveries. "If he has Ethan or knows where he is, we can't risk him disappearing." Flynn agreed, expediting federal resources to support the operation. By 3:30 p.m., as Troy Whitman returned from his shopping trip, he was met by federal agents and local officers who took him into custody for questioning. The interrogation that followed proved frustrating. Whitman, now represented by attorney Douglas Ramirez, maintained his innocence and offered plausible explanations for the hidden room. "My client works with sensitive technical documentation," Ramirez stated. "The secure room was built to protect proprietary information for his employers. The calendar entries refer to project deadlines. This is all a misunderstanding." Despite intense questioning over 12 hours, Whitman revealed nothing about Ethan Mercer's whereabouts. Without direct evidence linking him to the boy's disappearance, investigators could only hold him on charges related to the false statements he had made during the initial investigation, insufficient to keep him detained indefinitely. "We need something concrete," Flynn acknowledged during a tense strategy meeting. "The hidden room is suspicious but not conclusive. We need to identify those locations in his calendar before he has a chance to cover his tracks." Cryptanalysts worked through the night to decode Whitman's system, eventually determining that the notations referred not to geographical coordinates, but to property addresses disguised through a substitution cipher. The January 20th entry they discovered referred to a remote cabin in the Davis Mountains of West Texas, approximately 5 hours from Limestone County. This discovery prompted immediate action. On January 19th, while Whitman remained in custody on the limited charges available, a joint FBI local law enforcement team converged on the mountain property. The isolated cabin, accessible only by a rough dirt road, stood in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. The search revealed disturbing preparations: recently installed security systems, stockpiled supplies, and another hidden room, this one built beneath the cabin's floor and accessible through a concealed trapdoor. The space was clearly designed for human confinement, with restraints, basic sanitation facilities, and a ventilation system. He was preparing to move someone, Flynn concluded, examining the space. The question is, from where to here, or from here to somewhere else? The breakthrough in the investigation came not from the physical evidence, but from an unexpected media development. In February 2010, the television program Cold Case Files featured Ethan's disappearance, highlighting the mysterious circumstances and the continued heartbreak of the Mercer family. The program included interviews with investigators, including Detective Vaughn, who carefully discussed the case without revealing the details of the hidden room or Whitman's brief detention. The producers had reconstructed Ethan's last known movements and featured age progression images showing how he might look 3 years after his disappearance. The broadcast generated renewed public interest and, crucially, prompted a call from Dakota Jenkins, a former inmate who had briefly shared a cell with Whitman during his detention in January 2008. He talked in his sleep, Jenkins told investigators during his interview in March 2010, mostly mumbling, but sometimes clear words. One night he kept repeating something about checking on the boy and the house on Sycamore. When I asked him about it the next morning, he got real quiet, real fast. Jenkins hadn't understood the significance of these sleep-talking episodes until seeing the television program. His testimony, while not definitive, added to the growing body of circumstantial evidence connecting Whitman to Ethan's disappearance. Meanwhile, Vaughn had continued her methodical investigation of Whitman's movements and properties. Working with a specialized team from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, she developed a comprehensive profile of Whitman's patterns and psychology. "He's meticulous, patient, and highly intelligent," noted FBI psychologist Dr. Serena Montgomery. "The sophisticated planning evident in the hidden rooms suggests someone who thinks long-term and leaves nothing to chance. If he took Ethan, he would have established systems to maintain control over an extended period." This assessment led investigators to revisit their examination of 237 Sycamore Street with new perspective. The hidden room they had discovered in January 2008 showed signs of recent use. But what if it wasn't the only concealed space in the property? In April 2010, armed with enhanced scanning technology and additional structural expertise, investigators returned to Whitman's house with a new search warrant. This time, they focused on anomalies that might have been missed during the previous search. Using advanced thermal imaging and ground-penetrating radar, they identified another potential hidden area, this one beneath the garage, accessible through an elaborate system that required specific sequential activation of multiple triggers throughout the house. On April 23rd, after 3 days of careful examination, technicians finally accessed the second hidden space. What they found left even the most seasoned investigators speechless. The underground room, approximately 15 feet square, contained evidence of long-term human habitation. A bed, bathroom facilities, and crude living space were arranged with disturbing efficiency. Air was provided through a ventilation system disguised as part of the home's HVAC. Most significantly, the room contained personal items, clothing that appeared to match the size of a teenager rather than an adult, school books with Ethan Mercer's name written in childish handwriting, and a calendar on the wall with days meticulously crossed off, thousands of them. The last marked day was January 16, 2008, the day before the initial search of the property. He moved him, Vaughan realized, the timeline suddenly becoming clear. He must have relocated Ethan just before our search, possibly to the cabin. But the Davis Mountains property had been empty when searched in January 2008. If Whitman had moved Ethan from the hidden room beneath the garage, where had he taken him? The answer emerged when forensic technicians discovered a hidden compartment in the garage room containing documents, including property records for a house in Lakeside, a small community 50 miles north of Limestone County. County records revealed that the Lakeside property had been purchased by a corporation that investigators ultimately traced back to Whitman, operating under an alias. The purchase had been made in December 2007, just as Vaughan's investigation was closing in on him. On May 2, 2010, more than 3 years after Ethan's disappearance, a tactical team surrounded the Lakeside property. Thermal imaging confirmed human presence inside. After securing the necessary warrants, the team breached the house at dawn, prepared for a potential hostage situation. Inside, they found Troy Whitman, who had been living under the alias Thomas Warren. As officers secured the premises, they discovered yet another hidden room, this one behind a bookcase in the basement, and there, in that concealed space, they found 17-year-old Ethan Mercer, alive. The boy, now a thin teenager with hollow eyes, had been held captive for over 3 years, moved between locations whenever Whitman feared discovery. The sophisticated planning revealed a level of premeditation that shocked even veteran investigators. As Ethan was rushed to a hospital and Whitman was taken into custody, Detective Renata Vaughan made the call that law enforcement officers dream of but rarely experience. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," she said, her professional composure briefly cracking. "We found Ethan. He's alive." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a moment before it was broken by sounds that Vaughan would later describe as the purest expression of both agony and joy I've ever witnessed. The sobs of parents whose impossible hope had, against all odds, been justified. The discovery of Ethan Mercer alive after more than 3 years in captivity would soon capture national headlines, becoming one of the most remarkable outcomes in the history of missing children cases. But as medical teams began the process of assessing Ethan's physical and psychological condition, and as prosecutors prepared what would become one of the most comprehensive criminal cases in Texas history, the full extent of Troy Whitman's methodical predation was still emerging, a pattern that would ultimately reveal a calculated monster who had been hiding in plain sight for decades. The reunion between Ethan Mercer and his parents occurred on May 3, 2010, in a private room at Lakeside Regional Medical Center. Hospital staff had prepared the Mercers for their son's physical condition, the pallor of someone who had spent years with minimal sunlight, the thinness from a controlled diet, the muscle atrophy from confined movement. What no one could prepare them for was the emotional reality of seeing their son after 1,145 days of absence. Dr. Eleanor Richardson, the pediatric specialist overseeing Ethan's care, escorted Gregory and Allison to the room where their son waited, accompanied by a child psychologist and a victim advocate. "Take it slowly," Dr. Richardson advised. "He's been through an ordeal we can only begin to comprehend." When the door opened, Allison Mercer froze, her hand rising to cover her mouth. The boy, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, bore only a ghostly resemblance to the child who had disappeared on his way home from school. Now 17, Ethan had grown several inches taller. His facial features had matured, and his once bright eyes carried a wariness that spoke volumes about his captivity. "Mom," Ethan's voice cracked, simultaneously that of a child and a young man. "Dad." What followed was described by Dr. Richardson as the most profound demonstration of human resilience she had witnessed in 20 years of medical practice. The family embraced, weeping, touching each other's faces in disbelief, speaking in fragmented sentences as they tried to bridge the chasm of their separation. Meanwhile, 50 miles south in Limestone County, an extraordinary investigative effort was unfolding at 237 Sycamore Street. With Troy Whitman now in federal custody, investigators from multiple agencies converged on the property that had concealed Ethan for much of his captivity. "We need to document everything," Detective Renata Vaughan instructed the forensic team. "Every modification, every system, every piece of evidence that shows premeditation and intent. This may be one of the most significant crime scenes we'll ever process." The technical sophistication of Whitman's concealed rooms stunned even experienced structural engineers. The primary space beneath the garage, where Ethan had spent approximately 2 years of his captivity, featured multiple redundant systems designed for long-term human confinement. It wasn't improvised, noted FBI structural specialist Cameron Rhodes. This was designed like a self-contained habitat, ventilation independent from the house system, waste management that wouldn't register on municipal sewage monitoring, soundproofing that would prevent even screams from being heard. Most disturbing were the control mechanisms. Whitman had installed elaborate surveillance throughout the property and surrounding area, allowing him to monitor for threats while maintaining complete control over his captive. Electronic locks could only be operated from the outside, with backup power systems, ensuring they remained secure even during outages. "The level of planning is unprecedented," remarked FBI agent Barrett Flynn, who had returned to lead the federal aspects of the investigation. "This wasn't opportunity or impulse. This represents years of calculation." As the property was methodically documented, investigators uncovered evidence that the hidden rooms had been constructed immediately after Whitman purchased the house, months before Ethan's abduction. Building materials matched those purchased in February 2007, confirming that Whitman had prepared the space specifically for the purpose of holding a captive. "He built the cage before hunting for his prey," Vaughn observed grimly. Simultaneously, at the lakeside property where Ethan was ultimately found, investigators discovered another sophisticated hidden room, this one featuring upgraded security features that suggested Whitman had refined his methods over time. Documentation found at this location included detailed observations of Ethan's behavior, health and psychological state, a clinical record of captivity that chilled even veteran investigators. He was treating this like some kind of experiment, noted FBI psychologist Dr. Serena Montgomery, reviewing the materials. Recording responses, adjusting conditions, documenting changes in behavior. As physical evidence mounted, investigators also gained insight into the methodical nature of the abduction itself. Security footage from businesses near Limestone Middle School, initially overlooked due to their distance from Ethan's route home, was re-examined. Enhanced analysis revealed Whitman's vehicle circling the area repeatedly in the weeks before the abduction, surveillance that allowed him to identify and exploit the vulnerable point in Ethan's walk home. On the medical front, Ethan's physical assessment revealed the calculated nature of his captivity. While he showed signs of malnutrition and vitamin D deficiency, he had not been starved. Basic medical care had been provided, evidenced by a healed fracture that had been properly set, and a course of antibiotics found in the room that corresponded with documentation of a respiratory infection Ethan had developed in 2008. He wanted to keep him alive and functional, Dr. Richardson explained to investigators. The physical control was a means to an end, psychological domination. The psychological evaluation of Ethan, conducted with extraordinary sensitivity by specialists in trauma and captivity, revealed complex coping mechanisms. Ethan had developed a form of compliance as survival, creating mental escapes through books Whitman had provided and through elaborate fantasy worlds he constructed in his mind. "He didn't break," noted child psychologist Dr. Marcus Bennett. "That's the remarkable thing. Despite years of isolation and control, he maintained a core sense of self and hope for rescue." Perhaps most revealing were the rare moments when Ethan spoke directly about his captor. He described Whitman as coldly efficient, maintaining a formal relationship that combined elements of teacher, guard, and scientist. Whitman had established elaborate rules and routines, provided educational materials, and engaged in what he called instructional conversations, while maintaining absolute control. "He wanted me to learn," Ethan explained during a carefully managed interview, "but also to understand that he controlled everything, when I ate, when I slept, what I read, even when I could speak." By late May 2010, as Ethan began the long process of reintegration with his family and the world, prosecutors assembled what they described as one of the most comprehensive criminal cases in state history. District Attorney Victor Ramirez, working with federal prosecutors, charged Troy Whitman with kidnapping, false imprisonment, child endangerment, and multiple counts of child abuse. "The evidence is overwhelming," Ramirez told reporters. "The planning, the execution, the years of concealment, all meticulously documented by the perpetrator himself." On June 7, 2010, as Whitman awaited trial, the investigation took another significant turn. Execution of search warrants on storage facilities, rented under his various aliases, revealed evidence suggesting Ethan might not have been his first victim. In a climate-controlled unit in Dallas, investigators discovered boxes containing identification documents, photographs, and personal items belonging to two other boys who had disappeared in other states: Jeremy Kovacs, who had vanished from a Colorado suburb in 1998 at age 12, and Miguel Suarez, who had disappeared from his New Mexico neighborhood in 2001 at age 13. Both cases had gone cold after extensive investigations failed to produce leads. "This changes everything," Flynn stated during an emergency briefing. "We're potentially dealing with a serial predator whose activities span decades and multiple jurisdictions." Forensic analysis of the materials found in the storage unit led investigators to two other properties owned by Whitman under different identities, one in Colorado and one in New Mexico. Search warrants executed at these locations revealed hidden rooms similar to those found in Texas, though these had been meticulously cleaned and showed no signs of recent habitation. The grim theory that emerged was that Whitman had engaged in a pattern of abduction, captivity, and eventual disposal of victims when circumstances required him to relocate. The fate of Jeremy Kovacs and Miguel Suarez remained unknown, but investigators held little hope of finding them alive. "Based on the evidence, we believe Ethan Mercer is the only surviving victim," Flynn explained during a closed briefing with law enforcement officials. His rescue likely occurred during a transitional period when Whitman was preparing to permanently dispose of him and relocate once again. This theory gained support when investigators discovered detailed plans in the lakeside property for another location in northern Arkansas, including architectural drawings for yet another concealed room. Property records confirmed that Whitman, using another alias, had made a down payment on a rural property near the Ozark Mountains just weeks before his arrest. On January 23, 2011, exactly 8 months after Ethan's rescue, the most intensive phase of the investigation culminated in a moment that would be remembered by all involved. Based on information gradually provided by Ethan during therapeutic sessions, combined with financial records showing Whitman's travel to remote locations, search teams focused on a wooded area in western Colorado. There, in a carefully concealed grave, they discovered human remains later identified as Jeremy Kovacs, the Colorado boy who had disappeared 13 years earlier. 2 weeks later, similar investigative methods led to the recovery of Miguel Suarez's remains from a desert location in southern New Mexico. "It's the closure no family wants, but the answers they deserve," Vaughn told reporters, her normally stoic demeanor softened by the weight of the discoveries. As the full pattern of Whitman's crimes emerged, so did the extraordinary story of how Ethan had survived where others had not. During carefully managed therapeutic sessions, Ethan gradually revealed the psychological strategies that had helped him endure years of captivity. "I kept count," he explained to Dr. Bennett. "Every day, I made a mark. I told myself stories about what my parents were doing, imagined them still looking for me. I created worlds in my head where I could be free." Ethan also revealed a crucial detail that explained how he had maintained hope during his ordeal. Whitman had occasionally left news articles about the search for him where he could see them, apparently as a form of psychological manipulation intended to emphasize the futility of rescue. But the articles had the opposite effect, confirming for Ethan that he hadn't been forgotten, that somewhere beyond his confinement, people were still searching. "Every time I saw my name in those newspaper clippings, I knew I still existed to the world," Ethan explained, "that I wasn't just his possession." For the investigators who had worked the case for years, Ethan's survival represented both a miracle and a vindication of their refusal to abandon the search. For Detective Renata Vaughn, whose methodical approach had ultimately broken the case, the outcome brought a sense of professional fulfillment rarely experienced in law enforcement. "We're trained to follow evidence, not hope," she reflected, "but this case reminds us why we never stop looking." The technical examination of the Sycamore Street property continued into February 2011, yielding ever more disturbing evidence of the elaborate systems Whitman had designed. The hidden room beneath the garage, where Ethan had spent much of his captivity, revealed the calculated nature of the confinement. The space had been equipped with a bed bolted to the floor, basic sanitation facilities, and a desk where Ethan was required to complete educational assignments Whitman provided. Climate control systems maintained a constant temperature, regardless of external weather. Lighting could be controlled only from outside, allowing Whitman to impose artificial day-night cycles that often bore no relation to actual time, disorienting Ethan's sense of days passing. Most disturbing was the surveillance system. Hidden cameras monitored every aspect of Ethan's confinement, feeding to systems in Whitman's bedroom and home office. Microphones captured every sound. This constant observation allowed Whitman to anticipate resistance, prevent escape attempts, and maintain psychological control. The level of monitoring suggests an obsession with control beyond even typical captivity scenarios, noted Dr. Montgomery. This wasn't just about physical confinement, it was about omnipresent surveillance, knowing every moment, every movement, every potentially rebellious thought. The FBI's Technical Analysis Unit determined that Whitman had configured remote monitoring capabilities that allowed him to observe Ethan even when away from home, accessing the surveillance feeds through encrypted connections on his laptop or phone. He never let his guard down, Agent Flynn observed. Even when physically absent, he maintained the control infrastructure. This technology had also enabled Whitman to execute the rapid relocation of Ethan from the Sycamore Street property to temporary holding locations before the final move to Lakeside, all triggered by his growing awareness of Detective Vaughn's renewed investigation in late 2007. By March 2011, prosecutors had assembled a case that legal experts described as airtight. In addition to the physical evidence, they had Ethan's testimony, financial records showing purchases related to the captivity, and Whitman's own meticulous documentation of his crimes. It's rare to have a case where the perpetrator provides so much evidence against himself, District Attorney Ramirez noted. His compulsive record-keeping has built our case for us. On March 28, 2011, Troy Whitman appeared in federal court for a preliminary hearing. The man who had maintained such careful control over his environment now sat subdued in an orange jumpsuit, his expression blank as the charges were read. When asked how he pled, Whitman spoke just 2 words: not guilty. Legal experts speculated that the plea was likely a formality, possibly positioning for an insanity defense or negotiating leverage. But psychological evaluations had already determined that Whitman was fully aware of the nature and wrongfulness of his actions. His elaborate precautions against discovery demonstrated clear understanding that his behavior violated both law and morality. As the case progressed toward trial, scheduled for August 2011, the story of Ethan's rescue became the subject of national attention. News specials, magazine features, and documentaries explored the case from various angles. The years-long investigation, the technological sophistication of the captivity, and most compellingly, the resilience of a boy who had maintained his sense of self through an ordeal almost impossible to comprehend. For the Mercer family, however, the focus remained intensely personal, helping Ethan rebuild his life. Supported by specialists in trauma recovery, Ethan began the challenging process of reintegration, returning to education through carefully structured homeschooling, reconnecting with extended family, and learning to navigate a world that had continued without him for more than 3 years. He missed so much, Allison Mercer explained in a rare interview. His 14th, 15th, and 16th birthdays, middle school graduation, getting his learner's permit, the ordinary milestones that mark childhood and adolescence. We're trying to create new memories to fill that void, while honoring that the person who came back to us isn't the same child who left. The most powerful testament to Ethan's resilience came not from the sensational aspects of his captivity and rescue, but from a quiet moment described by his father. 6 weeks after returning home, Ethan asked to visit his old school, not to enter but simply to stand outside and observe the building. We drove there after hours, Gregory Mercer recalled. Ethan just stood on the sidewalk looking at the school for a long time. Then he said something I'll never forget. This is where my life was before. I need to see it to remember that I had a before, and now I have an after. As the case against Troy Whitman moved inexorably toward trial, the hidden rooms on Sycamore Street stood empty, their secrets exposed to the light. The house that had concealed such horrors became both a crime scene and a testament to human endurance. The place where a predator had exercised almost godlike control and where a boy had silently maintained the flame of his humanity against all odds. The discovery of what had occurred within those walls would forever change how the community of Limestone County understood itself. The monster had not been a shadowy stranger, but a neighbor who waved hello, a man who attended community events, who maintained his lawn and collected his mail, and presented every appearance of ordinary life. For the investigators who had pursued the case through years of dead ends and disappointments, the rescue of Ethan Mercer represented both a professional triumph and a sobering reminder of how easily predators can hide in plain sight. For Detective Renata Vaughn, whose methodical approach had finally unraveled Whitman's elaborate deception, the case would define her career and inform her approach to every investigation that followed. "We found him because we never stopped looking," Vaughn would later say. "Even when hope seemed irrational, even when the trail went cold, we kept asking questions. That's the lesson I carry forward. Persistence in the face of calculated evil." As summer approached and Ethan Mercer took tentative steps toward reclaiming his life, the justice system prepared to hold Troy Whitman accountable for his actions. The trial that would begin in August 2011 promised to be one of the most significant criminal proceedings in Texas history, not just for the charges related to Ethan's abduction and captivity, but for the broader pattern of predation that had finally been exposed after decades of carefully concealed horror. The trial of Troy Whitman began on August 15, 2011, in the Limestone County Courthouse, a century-old limestone building whose grand architecture seemed appropriate for proceedings of such historic significance. Security measures were unprecedented: metal detectors at every entrance, tactical officers positioned throughout the building, and a designated secure route for transporting the defendant from jail to courtroom. Public interest had reached extraordinary levels. The courthouse steps were crowded with media from across the country and around the world. Inside, the gallery was filled to capacity with journalists, legal observers, victims' advocates, and community members who had participated in the search for Ethan years earlier. District Attorney Victor Ramirez led the prosecution team, joined by Assistant U.S. Attorney Sophia Washington, representing the federal charges. Despite his high-profile record of successful prosecutions, Ramirez appeared visibly affected by the gravity of the case. "In my 23 years as a prosecutor, I have never encountered crimes that demanded justice more clearly than these," he told reporters before entering the courthouse. "Today, we begin the process of holding accountable a predator who operated in darkness for far too long." Troy Whitman entered the courtroom in handcuffs and leg shackles, wearing a tailored Navy suit that couldn't disguise his diminished appearance after more than a year in custody. His expression remained impassive as deputies escorted him to the defense table, where his attorneys, led by Douglas Ramirez, no relation to the prosecutor, awaited. Judge Clayton Brenner, who had approved the crucial search warrant that led to the case breaking open, presided over the proceedings with a solemn demeanor that set the tone for what would follow. As the court was called to order, he addressed the assembly. "The allegations in this case are among the most serious our justice system can contemplate," Judge Brenner stated. "I remind everyone present that our purpose is to determine the facts through due process and apply the law accordingly. This court will maintain the dignity these proceedings require." The Mercer family was noticeably absent from the courtroom, a deliberate decision made in consultation with prosecutors and Ethan's treatment team. While Ethan had provided recorded testimony during pre-trial proceedings, he would not be required to confront his captor in person, a protection afforded to minor victims of traumatic crimes. Opening statements revealed the strategies both sides would pursue. Prosecutor Ramirez presented a methodical timeline of Whitman's crimes, emphasizing the extraordinary premeditation evident in every aspect of the case. "This was not a crime of opportunity or passion," Ramirez told the jury. "What you will see is evidence of a predator who planned meticulously, executed precisely, and maintained control over his victim through elaborate systems designed for long-term captivity." The defendant created hidden rooms before identifying his victim. He studied Ethan's movements for weeks before abducting him. He constructed an environment where he exercised absolute power over every aspect of a child's existence for more than 3 years. Defense attorney Douglas Ramirez faced the nearly impossible task of representing a defendant against overwhelming evidence. His opening statement focused not on denying Whitman's actions, but on his psychological state. "The evidence will show that my client suffers from severe psychological disorders that prevented him from understanding the wrongfulness of his actions," Ramirez argued. His behavior, while undeniably harmful, stemmed from profound mental illness rather than deliberate malice. This strategy faced immediate challenges when prosecution experts presented evidence of Whitman's careful efforts to evade detection, behavior inconsistent with someone unable to distinguish right from wrong. His use of aliases, sophisticated hiding techniques, and calculated responses when questioned by authorities all demonstrated awareness of his actions' criminality. Over the following weeks, the prosecution methodically presented its case. Forensic experts detailed the construction of the hidden rooms, emphasizing the planning and expertise required. Financial records documented Whitman's purchases of materials and equipment specifically designed for long-term captivity. Technical specialists explained the surveillance systems that enabled total control over Ethan's environment. Detective Renata Vaughn provided pivotal testimony about the investigation's progression, explaining how seemingly minor inconsistencies in Whitman's statements had eventually led to the breakthrough that saved Ethan's life. Her detailed account of discovering the hidden rooms left several jurors visibly shaken. "When we finally accessed the space beneath the garage," Vaughn testified, "we found evidence of a child's existence that had been completely erased from the world above. School books with Ethan's handwriting, a calendar marking 763 days of captivity, a journal where he had written letters to his parents that he never believed they would read. Perhaps most powerful was the testimony from FBI agent Barrett Flynn regarding evidence found at Whitman's storage facilities, materials connecting him to the disappearances of Jeremy Kovacs and Miguel Suarez years earlier. Flynn methodically demonstrated how Whitman had refined his methods with each victim, learning from earlier experiences to create increasingly sophisticated systems of captivity. The defendant's crimes evolved over time, Flynn explained. Each abduction incorporated lessons from the previous one. The hidden room where Ethan was held represented the culmination of years of horrific refinement. The prosecution's most compelling evidence came from Ethan himself, presented through a carefully recorded deposition that spared him the trauma of testifying in person. The courtroom fell silent as Ethan's recorded testimony played, his voice steady but carrying the unmistakable weight of his experience. "He told me that no one was looking for me anymore," Ethan recalled in the recording. "But sometimes he would leave newspapers where I could see articles about the search, about my parents not giving up. I think he wanted to break my spirit, but instead those articles became my lifeline, proof that I still existed in the world, that I hadn't been forgotten." Ethan described the psychological tactics Whitman had employed: arbitrary punishment and reward systems, isolation, and constant surveillance designed to create complete dependence. He explained how he had maintained his sense of self by creating elaborate mental worlds where he could escape, if only in his imagination. "I counted everything," Ethan said. "Seconds, minutes, meals. I recited books I had read before. I imagined conversations with my parents, anything to remember who I was before he took me." The defense case, when finally presented, focused almost exclusively on Whitman's psychological state. Defense psychiatrists testified about personality disorders and delusional thinking, attempting to establish grounds for diminished capacity, if not outright insanity. However, cross-examination consistently returned to the calculated nature of Whitman's actions, undermining claims that he couldn't distinguish right from wrong. In a surprising development that accelerated the trial's conclusion, Whitman himself requested to address the court on September 14th against his attorney's advice. Judge Brenner allowed the defendant to speak after confirming he understood the potential consequences of his testimony. Whitman's statement shocked the courtroom. Rather than expressing remorse, he presented a clinical description of his actions, speaking in a detached manner that prosecutors would later describe as profoundly disturbing in its complete lack of human empathy. "I selected subjects based on specific criteria," Whitman stated, using terminology that deliberately dehumanized his victims. "Isolation potential, adaptability, intelligence. The environments were designed to maximize control while minimizing detection risk. Each iteration improved upon the previous design." When asked directly by Prosecutor Ramirez if he understood that he had caused immense suffering, Whitman's response crystallized the case for the jury. "I understood that society would view my actions as wrong," he replied. "That's why I took extensive precautions against discovery." This admission, acknowledging his awareness of wrongdoing while showing no remorse, effectively demolished the defense's diminished capacity arguments. Following Whitman's testimony, the defense case collapsed rapidly, with his own attorneys visibly struggling to maintain their previously established narrative. Closing arguments on September 19th presented stark contrasts. Prosecutor Ramirez methodically reviewed the evidence of Whitman's calculated crimes, emphasizing both the suffering of his victims and the deliberate nature of his actions. What the evidence has shown is not mental illness, but calculated evil, Ramirez told the jury. The defendant didn't just commit crimes, he built his entire life around them, creating elaborate systems specifically designed to kidnap children and hold them captive for years. He understood exactly what he was doing. He knew it was wrong, and he took extraordinary measures to avoid being caught. Defense attorney Ramirez, in his closing, focused on the broader implications of the case. No one disputes the terrible things that occurred, he acknowledged. The question before you is not what happened, but why, and whether someone whose mind works in such a profoundly abnormal way can be held fully accountable under our legal standards of responsibility. The jury deliberated for just 7 hours before returning with their verdict. On September 21, 2011, Troy Whitman was found guilty on all counts, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, child endangerment, and multiple counts of child abuse. The federal charges related to crossing state lines in the commission of crimes against children were similarly returned with guilty verdicts. The sentencing phase began the following day, with impact statements from the families of all 3 victims. Gregory and Allison Mercer chose not to attend in person, instead submitting a written statement read by victim advocate Maria Hernandez. Our son lost 1,145 days of his childhood to this man's cruelty, the statement read. No sentence can restore those days or erase the trauma he endured, but justice demands that Troy Whitman never again have the opportunity to do to another family what he did to ours. The parents of Jeremy Kovacs and Miguel Suarez, whose remains had been recovered based on evidence found during the investigation, delivered emotional testimonies about lives cut short and the years of agonizing uncertainty before their sons' fates were finally confirmed. For 13 years we lived in a terrible limbo, said Robert Kovacs, Jeremy's father, not knowing if our son was alive or dead, hoping against hope while fearing the worst. The confirmation of his death brought a grief beyond words, but also an end to the torment of uncertainty. On September 28, 2011, Judge Brenner delivered his sentencing decision. The courtroom was silent as he addressed Whitman directly. The crimes you have committed represent the darkest capabilities of human behavior, Judge Brenner stated. You deliberately targeted vulnerable children, subjected them to psychological torture through extended captivity, and in at least 2 cases, ended young lives that had barely begun. You have demonstrated no remorse, no recognition of the suffering you've caused, and no quality that suggests rehabilitation is possible. The sentence that followed was unprecedented in its severity. 3 consecutive life sentences, without possibility of parole for the murders of Jeremy Kovacs and Miguel Suarez, and the kidnapping and captivity of Ethan Mercer, plus an additional 48 years for the numerous associated charges. While the additional years may seem symbolic, given the life sentences, Judge Brenner explained, they represent this court's recognition of each individual crime committed against these children, each day of captivity, each act of abuse, each violation of their humanity. As Whitman was led from the courtroom for the last time, his expression remained unchanged, the same blank affect he had maintained throughout the proceedings. For those who had worked the case, this final absence of human emotion confirmed the assessment that Dr. Serena Montgomery had provided early in the investigation. We are dealing with someone who understands human emotions intellectually, but experiences none of the empathy that defines humanity. With legal proceedings concluded, public attention shifted to the most compelling aspect of the case, Ethan Mercer's ongoing recovery. Unlike the victims in many similar cases, Ethan had survived years of captivity and now faced the extraordinary challenge of rebuilding his life. The Mercer family had relocated to a new home in a different community, seeking privacy away from the intense scrutiny that had followed Ethan's rescue. With support from trauma specialists, educators, and medical professionals, they established a carefully structured environment designed to help Ethan gradually reintegrate into normal life. Dr. Marcus Bennett, the child psychologist who had worked with Ethan since his rescue, described the recovery process as rebuilding identity after profound disruption. What Ethan experienced was not just physical captivity, but an attempt to completely control his psychological development during crucial formative years, Bennett explained in a professional journal article published with the Mercer's permission. The remarkable aspect of his recovery is how he maintained core aspects of his identity despite this control. Ethan's education presented particular challenges. Having missed more than 3 years of formal schooling, He required intensive tutoring to address academic gaps. Yet cognitive assessments revealed that he had continued to develop intellectually during his captivity, partly through the educational materials Whitman had provided as part of his control mechanisms, and partly through Ethan's own determination to maintain mental activity. He created mathematical problems for himself, Alison Mercer revealed in a rare interview granted to raise awareness about child abduction recovery. When he had no access to books, he would compose and solve equations in his head, recite multiplication tables, anything to keep his mind active. By early 2012, Ethan had progressed sufficiently to begin limited attendance at a private school with staff trained in trauma-informed education. His reintegration was gradual, beginning with just 2 hours daily in a supported environment, slowly expanding as his comfort with social interaction increased. Physical recovery proceeded alongside psychological healing. Years of confinement had resulted in muscle atrophy, vitamin deficiencies, and vision issues from extended periods in artificial light. Physical therapy, nutritional support, and outdoor activity were incorporated into Ethan's daily routine, carefully balanced with his emotional capacity for new experiences. The world can be overwhelming after prolonged captivity, explained Dr. Eleanor Richardson, who continued to oversee Ethan's medical care. Things most people take for granted, open spaces, crowds, choices, can trigger anxiety and distress. Recovery means gradually expanding tolerance for these experiences. By the summer of 2012, Ethan had reached a significant milestone, his first public speaking engagement at a conference for law enforcement specialists in child abduction cases. Speaking to a carefully limited audience, with his parents and treatment team present for support, Ethan shared insights that would prove invaluable for both investigation techniques and recovery approaches. The worst part wasn't the physical confinement, he told the assembled professionals. It was the isolation, being erased from the world, becoming invisible. What helped me survive was believing that somewhere people remembered I existed. This understanding, that psychological connection remains vital even when physical connection is severed, would influence protocols for communicating with families of missing children and the public messaging around long-term missing persons cases. In December 2012, the Mercer family established the Ethan Mercer Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of missing children and developing resources for those recovered from abduction or trafficking situations. Rather than focusing on his own experience, Ethan channeled his insights into practical assistance for others facing similar ordeals. Recovery isn't linear, Ethan explained during the Foundation's launch event. Some days feel like progress, others like returning to the beginning. What matters is believing that healing is possible, even when it doesn't feel that way. By 2015, as Ethan approached his 21st birthday, his story had evolved from a sensational crime narrative to a powerful testament to human resilience. While he continued to deal with the lasting effects of his ordeal, including post-traumatic stress responses and occasional nightmares, he had successfully completed his high school education and enrolled in community college courses in psychology and criminal justice. "I don't want my experience to define me," he told a journalist working on a 5-year retrospective of his rescue, "but I can use what I learned about survival to help others find their way back from trauma." For Detective Renata Vaughn, whose methodical investigation had ultimately led to Ethan's rescue, the case represented both a career-defining achievement and a profound personal impact. She maintained contact with the Mercer family, becoming an advisor to their foundation and a mentor to Ethan as he considered a potential future in victim advocacy. "What stays with me isn't just the investigation or the rescue," Vaughn reflected during a law enforcement training seminar. "It's what we learned about never giving up, about following even the smallest inconsistencies, and about the incredible capacity of the human spirit to endure and recover." FBI agent Barrett Flynn, who had returned to the case at crucial moments despite reassignment, incorporated lessons from the investigation into training protocols for the FBI's child abduction response teams. The sophisticated concealment methods used by Whitman led to enhanced search techniques and technology now employed in similar cases nationwide. The Mercer case changed how we approach long-term missing children investigations, Flynn explained. "We now look more closely at patterns of behavior over time, at property modifications, at the technological signatures of concealment." For the community of Limestone County, The case prompted lasting changes in child safety awareness and neighborhood vigilance. Schools implemented enhanced security measures, and community watch programs expanded. The house at 237 Sycamore Street, after standing empty for years following the investigation, was eventually demolished at community request, the land transformed into a small memorial park dedicated to missing children. By 2016, 5 years after Troy Whitman's conviction, Ethan Mercer had emerged not just as a survivor, but as an advocate whose insights were reshaping approaches to recovery and resilience. Speaking at a national conference on child protection, he offered a perspective that only someone with his unique experience could provide. The most important thing I learned during my captivity was that hope isn't just an emotion, it's a practice, he told the audience. Even in the darkest circumstances, even when rescue seems impossible, maintaining connection to your true self is an act of resistance. That's what I want other survivors to know. Your captor may control your environment, but your mind and spirit remain your own. As Ethan continued his education and advocacy work, his story became emblematic of a profound truth, that even after the most extreme trauma, recovery and renewal remain possible. The boy who had maintained his humanity through 1,145 days of captivity had grown into a young man whose voice now helped others find their way back from darkness. For Gregory and Allison Mercer, whose refusal to abandon hope had sustained them through years of uncertainty, their son's ongoing recovery represented a miracle they acknowledged every day. While their family had been forever changed by Troy Whitman's actions, they had refused to allow his cruelty to define their future. There are moments when it still feels surreal, Allison admitted during a foundation event. When I hear Ethan laughing with friends or see him planning for his future, I'm overwhelmed by the knowledge of how close we came to losing all of this. We're not just grateful for his rescue, we're in awe of his resilience. The final word on this extraordinary case perhaps belongs to Ethan himself, who on the 10th anniversary of his rescue in 2020 published a memoir titled Counted Days: Finding Self After Captivity. The book, which became a national bestseller, concluded with a reflection that captured both his personal journey and its universal implications. We all experience captivity of some kind, whether physical, emotional, or psychological. What matters isn't the confinement, but how we preserve our essential selves within it. I counted days as a way to maintain control of something when everything else was controlled for me. But I've learned that true freedom isn't just about physical space. It's about the capacity to choose who we become, regardless of our circumstances. That choice remains ours always, even in the darkest rooms.